Well, the latest figures from Trade Me show that New Zealand rents remain stubbornly high. The national median weekly rent fell by 1% to $575 in May, down from an all-time high in April. But rents remain high overall, up 7% nationally compared to this time last year. Well, joining me now to talk about how hard it is to get ahead for young renters in particular is Bernard Hickey, editor of thekaka.substack.com. Okay, Bernard, it's expensive to rent right across the country. And the upshot is that you think young Kiwi renters are better off to move to Australia.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that people who are young here and have skills and who are thinking about their futures need to look at what they can make in income from their jobs, but also how much it costs in rent and how much they can save for their deposit. And the problem with doing that in New Zealand versus Australia is that Australian incomes are 30 to 40% higher. And I was pointing out that actually the number of job ads going in Australia is up by almost 400,000 in the last 6 weeks. So there is enormous demand at high wages for skilled young New Zealanders. And the difference between New Zealand and Australia this time around, compared to even 7 or 8 years ago, is that our rents have risen significantly faster than Australian rents. In fact, in some areas in Australia, particularly some of the CBD areas in Sydney and Melbourne, where they've had a boom of apartments, the apartments there are cheaper than they are in the likes of Wellington and Auckland. So there is a real option for young New Zealand who maybe don't have huge connections, who can get a higher wage job and pay less rent and save money for that deposit, maybe to come home in the end.
Well, I was so surprised to see that, Bernard, because this is not something that I think that you've advocated for before, is it?
Over the last year or so, I've been saying to young people who are maybe listening to what the politicians and various other people are saying about, yes, well, you just need to wait for a while. We're improving the housing supply. We're looking to do things. And you need to know that both National and Labor are not committed to the major reforms that are needed to actually reduce prices substantially and also to increase the housing supply so that rents start to fall, in part because politically it's very difficult when the main people who vote you in are also the people who own homes and who are landlords. So for young renters, waiting is not an option because it could be 10, 20 years before we get to affordable levels. And if you need to do the saving, now is the time.
Well, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because there is no political will to really fix this problem, I don't think. We hear platitudes from politicians all the time. And yet, as you say, the conditions remain the same and young people remain locked out of the market at the moment, despite everybody saying it's a really good time for people to buy.
Yeah, so what we've seen so far is house prices down 7% since November. But when you look at how much they rose between the beginning of COVID and the end of last year, prices rose, they exploded 45% in less than 2 years. Essentially, that's another generation of young New Zealanders who can't afford to get into a housing market on their own. And it deepens the divide in New Zealand between those who own homes, those families who own homes, and those people who don't. And it's at the point now where in New Zealand, if you want to have the hope of home ownership and having your own family where you've got some stability and a chance to make some savings and have a comfortable retirement, you essentially have to marry into wealth. I joke that the New Zealand version of Tinder or Bumble should have a checkbox to say, my parents own property and therefore I'm a good catch. And it's something that isn't really talked about because effectively it says that the New Zealand dream of starting a family, having your own home is gone unless you have rich parents. And that's where we are now because house prices are 8 to 10 times income. And also rents are the most expensive in the world relative to incomes.
It's extraordinary. Now, I'm glad that you're talking about it, Bernard. Thanks so much for joining us here on 8 o'clock.